Hello, I'm Donald Leggett, and welcome to an extended Q&A interview with George Lucan, Chairman at Angus Energy, and Richard Herbert, the newly appointed CEO. Angus Energy is a producer of gas at Saltfleetby and has ambitions to become a player in the aggregation, production and storage of gas. George and Richard join me now for an extensive operational update in which they will be mainly answering your questions, and with some prompting around the edges from me, as you'll discover. Greetings, George. Perhaps we can start by introducing Richard and explaining why you thought it was time to step up to executive chairman and to appoint a CEO to do the hard work.
Oh, thank you. Well, as you know, Donna, you remember 4 years ago I joined this company as an interim managing director, so I've had a very long interim period. However, I'm not born in the blood oil and gas man. Richard Herbert here, who has pedigree as lead in exploration at BP and Frontera, amongst other things, which he can enlighten you with. He has genuine pedigree, experience, and depth across the industry, which I didn't have. So I regarded myself always as a caretaker, and it's with great pleasure that we've been able to find at last a CEO that shareholders can look to with pride and expectation. So at that point, Richard, would you want to introduce yourself? You came in at a very difficult time for the company, halfway through a drill. Do you want to just give a word or two about your initial experiences with the company?
Certainly, George, and yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. And so I'm Richard Herbert. I joined as the CEO in early March. I'm delighted to be at Angus at a very exciting time in the company's evolution. Company's been through a lot of growth, and of course, with growth come growing pains in the last 3 or 4 years, which George has stewarded us through, and we're now at I think the start of a new phase of the company with our production facilities operating, with our new well. We talk about these things during this interview. So I'm very pleased to be here. I'm sort of working my way down in scale in the oil industry, having starting with Phillips Petroleum, which is now part of ConocoPhillips, and then many years at BP, and then a series of sort of smaller independent companies, but now arriving at Angus, which is today almost a single asset company, is a new scale for me. But I've had a lot of operational experience in oil and gas fields, particularly onshore, and including my time at BP. I spent 2 years at the Witch Farm field in Dorset, which of course was the UK's biggest oil field, and now I'm involved in the UK's biggest onshore gas field. So I'm very excited to be at Angus and very excited about the opportunities that we have.
So I don't know if it's as exciting to you as it is to us, given that you've got such wealth of experience, but Angus have taken on a sidetrack well and delivered it. And it wasn't easy. So I have to say congratulations. And Richard, you're the man to answer that one now then.
Well, thank you, Donald. Yes, we're very pleased to have the well on stream. We announced that at the beginning of last week, and the well is flowing well through the plant, and we're selling the gas from the new well into the grid alongside production from one of the other existing wells. As we said in our last RNS, our intention now is to move to dual compressor operations and bring the third well back into operation that we've currently suspended, so that we can start to ramp up production. And this isn't something, people would say this must be very simple. Why don't you just turn things on and let them flow? But there's a lot of control issues bringing the 2 compressors online simultaneously. We've not actually done that yet. We've been operating either the first compressor or the second compressor, but now as we announced last week, we're on the point of now introducing the full plant into operation with the 3 wells, and this is when we start to see the production ramping up to where we want to get it to.
Okay, it's all about balancing the different sets of equipment out, as I understand it from George previously.
Yeah, I mean, this is again, it sounds simple, but it's in reality, it's complicated. We have to deal with the different pressures that the three wells are flowing under. We have to make sure that we balance those pressures coming into the plant. The new well it's flowing very well, but it's also what we call cleaning up. So during the drilling operation, we pump a lot of drilling fluids into the well to help stabilize it. And this inevitably, these chemicals form a precipitate that has to flow back with the gas and the condensate. And that we have to take out before it gets to the plant because we don't want it damaging the plant. So we're still in this phase of cleanup. It's going to take a few more months probably before we get clean gas flowing out of the new well, but all the indications from the production so far are very positive.
That's fantastic. Okay, our first question from our retail audience is from Martin Grand, who says, please can you give a brief outline of the project economics at Saltfleetby once the three wells are all connected and performing on a consistent basis, as you've just outlined? And he says, do you think you could get 9 to 11 million scuffs out of it once it's all cleaned up and the permanent flow line is in place? Thank you.
Well, no, it's a great question from Martin. I mean, we're not going to give any specific production forecasts at this stage because we still have to see how the new well cleans up. We have to see how the plant adapts to having the three wells coming into it. We've got temporary facilities to deal with the cleanup, as I described. So, the best thing for people, for our shareholders, I think, is to monitor first of all, what we put out in our RNSs, and certainly at least every quarter we are going to announce how production's going. And you can also look on the National Grid website to see what Saltfleetby is producing. So we want to be measured by our results, not by sort of what we prognose. I mean, what I will say is that so far this year we've been averaging between 5 and 5.5 million cubic feet a day of gas, and that's with 2 wells and 1 compressor in operation. Now that we've moved to 3 wells and we're moving to 2 compressors, we are going to definitely see a significant increase in that, and so people should be very aware that this is imminent, that we're going to raise the production from the field.
Okay, 9 to 11. Are you going to take a stab at that?
I'm not going to be drawn on production levels, Donald. Everyone would love me to give a number. I think I don't want to sort of pass judgment on Angus in the past, but I think there was a bit of a tendency to overpromise and then underdeliver. That's not something that I'm used to, and it's not something that I would like to see happening in the future. So if anything, I'm not going to underpromise. I'd like to promise what I know we can deliver, and I want to make sure that we're very clear on our word on that. So once we have more information, once we have more data, then and we have the confidence to put numbers out there, potentially we will. But I think we're better judged by what the data shows from the National Grid.
Okay, which takes us nicely to Gary Bamsley's question: what flow is expected to the grid from the new sidetrack?
Well, we announced last week that the new well would had tested at rates that we thought it would be capable of producing between 4 to 5 million cubic feet a day from that single well, B7. We've been pleased to see those numbers achieved during the last week or so. And as I said earlier, the well is continuing to clean up, as we call it, which means that as we remove the solids from the well bore and from the immediate reservoir around the well bore, we should expect to see that increase. Now, I don't think that will be a significant increase, but it's a gradual improvement in flow rates. So far, so good. We're seeing exactly what we hope to see from the new well.
Okay, and apologies, I can't find the gentleman's name, but someone has asked, will the new well have its own condensate system? The separation system won't cope with all the condensate.
Yeah, I don't know if there's been some confusion about this. The new well is flowing through temporary facilities at the moment because it's going to take a while to put the permanent facilities in place. And as I said earlier, while we're cleaning the well up, we don't want to introduce all this sort of mucky solids and chemicals into the processing plant, which could damage it. So the temporary facilities have a what's called a temporary separator in. And so when the flow from the well goes into the separator, it takes out the majority of the liquids, which are condensates, before the rest of the gas stream flows into the main plant. So right now we do have a sort of segregated condensate processing system, and we don't have any bottleneck on that whatsoever. Once the well is cleaned up and once we've hooked up the permanent flow line, which we're planning to do, it'll take us about 3 months in total to do all the engineering work for that. So we're looking at late summer, I think, for the permanent flow line, by which time we're hopeful that the cleanup will be sufficiently far advanced that we can put the new well straight into the plant. Then at that time, our main separator and condensate units will be dealing with all the condensate that's being produced by the 3 wells.
Okay, that was a question asked by Jonathan Smith. So thank you, Jonathan, for that. And over to Tim Owen, who asks, are there any other drilling plans for Saltfleetby in the future?
We don't have any firm drilling plans at this stage. Having just finished a well, having still not tied it in with the permanent flow lines, it's too early to think about any further drilling at this stage. Having just arrived here, I'm conscious that there's some work we have to do on our geological model of Saltfleetby. This field, was produced for quite a long period of time. Quite a lot of gas was taken out of it in its previous phase of development, and we want to have a very good idea of what the remaining reserves in the field are, and what is the most efficient way to extract them to get the maximum value for our shareholders. So we are starting some work on the geological model to update it, and that part of that work will look at the opportunities that exist to drill further wells into the field. They would probably be similar to this last well. We would sidetrack from some of the old abandoned wells that are in the field. So that saves us having to drill a completely new well from the surface. And we have a number of potential locations where we could put these wells. But at this stage, we need to do more technical work and then obviously commercial work to assure ourselves that these are good value enhancing opportunities for Angus.
Okay, and another sidetrack question, this time from Jonathan Smith. Oh no, wrong. Apologies. Sidetrack costs from Simon Smith. Too many Smiths, too many sidetracks. What was the total cost of the sidetrack, and what's the time frame for the funds to go back into the business from the government levy?
Well, let me address the first part of that question, and then perhaps ask George to talk about the sort of taxation regime. I mean, on the last sidetrack well, clearly because the well was very late in being delivered, it came in over budget, which was a disappointment, but I think reflects a number of realities that Angus had to deal with. The first of all is that this is difficult geology for drilling. One of the things I've discovered recently, if you go back through the history of the wells previously drilled in the field by previous operators, all of them encountered significant drilling problems because we have a very tricky geological section just above the reservoir, which causes hole stability problems. And sure enough, despite all the precautions that were taken, we had difficulties drilling that section. We're drilling into a depleted reservoir, which means the pressure has been drawn down because there's been years and years of gas production, and that always causes drilling difficulties, which meant we had to change to a different mud system to drill through the reservoir section. It's another thing is, since I last worked in the UK in the early 2000s onshore, our industry has really contracted, and there's very limited contractor base for drilling onshore wells in the UK now. And so we encountered issues with equipment, we encountered issues with personnel. The industry is not well supported. And it says to me that if we were in the future to do some more drilling operations, which I hope we'll be able to do, we have to be very well prepared for that, because it's very hard to pick up the phone and get equipment at short notice, because the base of suppliers that existed before is no longer there. So in summary, we did have challenges with this well, but the good news is ultimately we were successful. We got the well drilled. We have a new horizontal section, which we were able to complete and put on production, and is flowing very well. So it ended well, but there's a lot of learnings that came from the drilling project.
But I would say, isn't this exactly so with every sidetrack, with every drill that you ever do? There's just an enormous amount of learning that goes on as you learn more about the geology and the difficulties.
Yes, there's a lot you can learn from the things that are difficult. There's also new technology. The mud technology that we used to drill the final wellbore section was new technology for us in this field, and it gave us enormous confidence that when we come to drill the next time, we will be able to do it much more efficiently than we did it this time.
Okay, and over to you, George, about the taxation elements of the question.
Yes, well, it's the question asked whether funds would flow back. It's not quite as simple as that. We have been an exploration company until recently. We're now, of course, a producing company, so we're now making taxable profits. But we've accumulated over the years a sizable amount of taxable losses, as indeed did our erstwhile partner and now subsidiary, Saltfleetby Energy Limited. So we haven't really paid tax as a company, and because of those carry forward losses, we're not likely to in the near term. The point about the energy levy is that there's a very high, that's an additional tax burden, which you can't use those carry forward losses on. So in theory, we might be caught by that, but we're reasonably confident that the spend that we have incurred on the process plant, at least some of it, and all of this spend on the sidetrack, should be eligible for the traditional capital allowance first year relief and or the investment allowance relief, which should bring almost all of that expenditure as a relief for tax eventually. So in other words, we don't see ourselves paying anything out, but they won't write checks if you've never written checks to them, at least in this industry. But we shouldn't be paying tax for a good while. I think that's the point to know.
Okay, that's a very good answer. Okay, back to you, Richard. And here we go. Let's name check 3 different people: Jeffrey Green, Paul Howe, James Castle Mason. They're all asking more or less the same questions. What's the priority order for new assets, new projects, and immediate goals?
Yeah, very good question from those 3 investors. I mean, I'm very clear right now that our top priority is to establish safe, reliable operations at Saltfleetby. That is our biggest priority because that's what generates cash, and that's what will allow Angus to strengthen its financial position and position itself for the future. And also, it will allow us to establish our reputation as a competent operator here in the UK. So for the time being, we're going to focus on that. I mean, Saltfleetby is a great asset, and we are going to as I said earlier, we're going to continue exploring the options we've got to continue investing in Saltfleetby, whether that be in additional drilling to get more reserves or accelerate production from the field. It could be more processing capability to draw down the pressures more to increase reserves, so additional compression. And ultimately, we will be the operator of what could be one of the most significant storage sites in the UK for some form of gas, whether it be natural gas, whether it be hydrogen, whether it be carbon storage. We have a very interesting asset here that longer term could play a very important role in the energy transition. So Saltfleetby remains as a very important priority for us. I mean, obviously, we're in a world of higher gas prices now, as well as higher oil prices, and we are looking to see what other assets and other projects are available, which could be a good strategic fit for Angus. And I think our focus will remain in the area of clean energy, whether it be from gas and potentially renewables in the future. So we're looking at potential for geothermal as well as for gas projects. But one thing that I think is important to emphasize is that the projects that we look for and any projects that we would then bring into the company would have to be of a scale that would make them within Angus's reach.
Okay. It's fair to say that the stock market, Angus is AIM listed, the stock market has a lack of appreciation of Saltfleetby. I would say that AIM stocks often are either overpriced or underpriced, and very seldom seem to be accurately priced. But if you could address the market's lack of appreciation of Saltfleetby for me, please, Richard.
Yeah, let me say a few words, and then perhaps we could also ask George for his views on this, because this is obviously something that exercises us a lot. We want the share price to perform and our shareholders to be happy with the share price performance. I mean, I think, as I mentioned earlier, we've maybe had a tendency in the past to overpromise and then underdeliver, and I think that's created a sense of slight disbelief maybe in the company, which is something that we will take time to change as we seek to sort of reverse that sort of mantra.
Richard,
as I just said,
can I interrupt there? I think you're being rather hard on yourself, to be perfectly frank. I mean, timescales have slipped, certainly, but I just don't see Angus as having underdelivered. At the end of the day, you've got a great asset and it's performing. So it's taken a wee bit longer than perhaps it might have. But isn't that just the nature of complex projects?
Well, we always say that, I think you're being very kind, Donald, and I appreciate the sentiment. I mean, a perfect project comes on time, on budget, and delivers what you set out to do. We've delivered what we set out to do, but we are late and we're over budget. So we've scored on one of the three things. We can recover from this position because we're going to be strongly cash generative in the next phase of the company. There's a lot of learnings from it, and the company is growing up and preparing itself for bigger things. We do have a great asset at Saltfleetby. We've got very robust energy prices. There's a big focus on energy security in Europe, and particularly for the UK now. So I think we're very well positioned. That said, our shares, in our view, are undervalued. And some of that is probably we have to tell the story better, and we have to build investor confidence, and that's what we intend to do. But maybe George could just add a few words there if he'd like to.
Thank you.
Yes, I think I'd only add that the recent performance, a lot of that is very traditional, buy the rumor, sell the news, and also we've had this unfortunate situation of building out a temporary flow line, which has staggered the good news over many small events, if you like, rather than having one great, oh, here we go, we've gone from 5 million to 10 million standard cubic feet a day. That would have been ideal. And we haven't. We've instead had to explain to investors each stage, which I think surprised a lot of investors, that, you know, you've drilled your well, you've turned it on, why aren't you putting it in the farm? There's a little bit of surprise there. The only thing I'd add is that built this permanent connection to this particular well, if we do a further 2 sidetracks, we won't have this agony again. We'll have a much swifter connection, because this flow line runs to a batch of wells, any of which can be repurposed for sidetracks in the future. So that's the good news. But as I say, it's been unfortunate the way the news has dribbled out, and there's always a bit of by the rumor, isn't there? So there we go.
There we go.
And George, perhaps I could just add, because I saw a comment that, you know, why didn't we think of building the permanent flow line while we were drilling the well? Was something that was sort of said to us. And I think it's important to point out that we've got quite a small site at Saltfleetby where our processing plant is. We had an enormous rig positioned there with all of the ancillary equipment that goes around the rig. There was no way we could get access to build that flow line until the rig had been removed. And so these things have to happen in a particular sequence. And as it turns out, as I said earlier, we need to clean the well up anyway. So the temporary flow line will suit us for the next few months, and then we'll have the permanent line installed. And as George says, that's good for the future if we elect to do more drilling off this site.
Okay. Now, there's an investor called Clive Potter, and he's crossed that management haven't actually bought more shares. So let me put the question to you: will senior management be buying shares in the company?
Well, this manager will. Yes. Let me ask George, as the executive chairman, to talk to that, and then I can add something if necessary.
Yeah. Well, we certainly don't. We always do encourage all of the senior management to invest in the company. There are and have been a slew of reasons why it's sometimes quite difficult for us to do so. We can't invest when we have any knowledge of any forthcoming projects or impending acquisitions or disposals or any event whatsoever. And then, of course, there's the usual period of time when we're in possession of knowledge about forthcoming releases of accounts. And in an average year, I have to say that for the last 3 years that I've been here, it knocks out about 9 months of the year. But we tend to get our opportunity to invest when the market's spiked. But nonetheless, I think I have already invested in the past, and I will certainly be investing again, particularly at these levels, the second that my Nomad gives me opportunity to do so. And I think I'll hand over to Richard for his own commitment there.
No, very good, George. And I just echo what you said. I believe and have always believed that management should be prepared to invest in the companies in which they're managing. And I have a track record of doing that in the past companies that I've been in, and certainly intend in Angus to become a shareholder. So absolutely yes is the answer.
Okay, and I'm flowing from that. Paul Spencer asks a very interesting question about a full listing. He writes a very long and comprehensive question, but the essence of it is that AIM is a lottery, and you need a full listing to protect true value. Perhaps we could put that one to you, George.
Yes, I'm not sure. Thanks for the question. I think it's a good one, but I'm not sure that I would agree with the sort of tentative way in which that question's headed. I think the AIM is a good market. If anything, regulation is now tighter than it is, particularly for us in the mining and extractive industries, than it is in the main market. We certainly find ourselves looked at more closely. Also, it's not a lot cheaper than a main market listing. I also think I've never heard of a fund saying, I won't invest in AIM-listed stocks. There are some very large AIM-listed stocks which funds will invest in. So I don't see a great advantage in relisting at this stage. There may be some foreign investment which are not catching here on the AIM, but that less and less in discussions with brokers. I find that The modern communications are such that people are very happy. Overseas investors are, where they're allowed to by their own governments, very happy to look at all the exchanges here, certainly at the AIM. I think the biggest bar here is our size. If we want to get a core of institutional shareholders, we have to be bigger. Institutional shareholders would take a view that unless they're making a £5 or a £10 million investment, it's simply not worth the amount of due diligence and management time they'll need to devote to making that investment in order to deploy capital toward us. So, if you've got 5 or 10 million coming from an institution somewhere, then that demands a market cap of nearer 100. So that's where I think the bar is nowadays for institutional. We've got to get up from 50 toward the 100 mark, and then we'll start getting more of that institutional flow.
And I suppose the extract, the corollary to that one is, so what are the plans to build the business to that higher level? Because you're an ambitious man, George. I've spoken to you often. You're competitive, you're ambitious, and you're ambitious for Angus, which is always a pleasure to see. So where did you go from here?
I don't think it's simply an ambition. I think it's actually a necessity that we get up to a height where capital is widely available. There's no point being so small. And one of the things I'm pleased about Angus and the way the board's evolved is there hasn't been any of the sort of fearful fiefdom-like outlook, where people hang on to their independence, they don't allow the board to evolve and grow, and they're worried about who their shareholders are. We're very open as a company. We want to see ourselves grow that fast. And how do we grow? Well, I think one of the reasons that Richard's here is his background and experience in front of not only investors, but also market counterparties, is bringing a level of credibility, which is supported by the management changes he's making as well in terms of bidding for larger assets. I think, as Richard said, we want those assets to be within our reach, so not unrealistically large, but nonetheless, we want them to be substantially larger than perhaps even Saltfleetby is. So, yes, we're ambitious. Thank you, Don.
Great. Okay, dividends. Tim is not keen on dividends. Stephen, oh, crikey. No, Stephen doesn't want a dividend, yet Tim does. And Brian Dvorkin is interested in a special dividend. So if you could debate the benefits of paying a dividend, not paying a dividend, and for Brian, will there be a special dividend?
Well, Donald, it's always difficult to align ourselves with every shareholder because people have different views on this. We are deeply committed to shareholder value, and everything we do has that in mind. Clearly, in the short term, we're not in a position to implement dividends. As I said, we're working over the next few months to sort of stabilize production, start generating positive cash flow, and strengthening our balance sheet, putting the company on a solid financial footing. So that is our absolute sort of near-term focus. And also, we need to make sure that sort of going forwards, we have the right amount of debt for the company and the right cost of debt. So once we've got through this next phase, obviously we can start to consider the returns to shareholders and how those will happen. And clearly, dividends and/or share buybacks can be an element of that, but that's something that we will give very active consideration to in due course.
Okay, Richard, good question. Here we go. Final question. I always like to, this is a bit of a curveball question, really, asked by both Mark Stevenson and Brian Dvorkin. In essence, you could sum it up as saying, is Angus Energy up for sale? Or would you ever contemplate a takeover, which is another way of saying the same thing? Because presumably you're listed on the market and shareholder value is where it's at. So both of you, let's ask George first, please.
Well, I'd say we're always up for sale, Donald. You can find our shares on the AIM. The listing's ANGS, if you're feeling tempted this afternoon. And we'd say that to any market counterparty. Of course, if someone's coming with a good deal for our shareholders, we're going to put it to our shareholders. And we're not shy at all about our independence if it turns out that the path forward is easier in a larger entity, then let's take that path. I don't think there's any doubt about our commitment to shareholder value in that sense.
But Sound Energy didn't cut it in the past. Is that correct?
Didn't feel that was a pathway to an easier pathway to growth than being independent. I think that's really the point.
No, that's understood. And Richard, do you have something to add there?
Well, I echo what George said. I mean, yes, we're for sale, but it would have to be at the right price. It would have to make sense for our shareholders, and we would put it to our shareholders. So, right now, it's not. We're not in a sale process. We're not looking for a buyer. We're focused on Angus's opportunities and everything we can do at Saltfleetby and the things we can do beyond that to grow the company. If someone comes along and wants to take us over and makes a deal, makes an offer that is irresistible, then clearly it's our duty to take it seriously. But all in good time.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today on London Southeast. You've been listening to George Lucan, Executive Chairman at Angus Energy, and Richard Herbert, the new CEO. They've been outlining the plans for the future and current operations. Thank you so much for that. That was absolutely fantastic, fascinating, lots of depth there. For more free company about and data about Angus, please go to the ANGS pages on London Southeast. It's very lively on there. If you've got if you need a strong stomach, but it's very lively. Meanwhile, do follow us on Twitter at London Southeast, or register on London Southeast YouTube to receive alerts to interviews, webinars, and extended Q&As just like this. Thanks to you all for being a great audience. Thank you.